He used to say blue was my color. Even now, as I pulled the sweater over my shoulders, I could hear his voice. Soft, amused, full of that quiet certainty he always had. "You wear blue like the sky misses you," he'd say, and I'd roll my eyes, pretending I didn't like the compliment. That was before he was gone, before dinners turned into obligations, before I became invisible in my own family. The mirror didn't lie. My hair, once auburn, now fully gray, still thick enough to braid. My eyes, smaller than I remembered, with those soft pockets underneath. The sweater was simple. Navy, clean lines, warm wool. I chose it because I knew Marlene wouldn't roll her eyes at it. Not flashy, not grandmotherly. I chose everything these days with that same consideration. Not what I liked, but what wouldn't bother them. The invitation had come from Michael. A group message, short and formal. Dinner Saturday 6 p.m., our place. That was it. No, "Would love to see you, Mom," or "It's been a while." Just a line, like a reminder for a dentist appointment. I said yes, of course. I always said yes. I had picked up a bottle of wine earlier that day, one of the nicer ones, because Michael liked good wine and I wanted, God knows what I wanted, approval, inclusion, to be seen. The ride to their house felt longer than usual. The streets had changed, or maybe I had. There was construction where the bookstore used to be, new condos where the bakery once stood. The world kept moving forward, leaving old things behind. Old women. Old mothers. When I pulled into the driveway, Michael's car was there, Marlene's too, and an unfamiliar black SUV. Probably their oldest's, Jacob's. He was married now. I wasn't sure if he and his wife were coming. They'd moved to the city 2 years ago. I hadn't seen them since the wedding, though I sent gifts for every birthday, every holiday. The door opened before I could knock. Marlene stood there, slim and composed as always, her lipstick a sharp, expensive red. She offered a smile, brief, efficient. "Margaret." "Come in." Just Margaret, not Mom, not even, "Come in, it's good to see you." I stepped inside. The house smelled like rosemary chicken and vanilla candles. The table was already set, long and formal, cloth napkins folded with precision, name cards at each seat. I noticed mine immediately, at the far end, not near Michael, not even near the middle. Marlene led me in with the grace of someone hosting a client. "Wine?" she asked, already pouring. "This one's from Napa. We usually do local, but Michael's been particular lately." I nodded, taking the glass. I hadn't even sat down yet, and I already felt like an afterthought. Michael appeared from the hallway, phone in hand. "Hey," he said, eyes on the screen. "Glad you made it." That was all. Glad I made it. I wanted to ask about Nora, my granddaughter. She hadn't responded to my last message. I wanted to ask if she'd be here tonight. But something about Michael's tone told me not to. Others arrived. Jacob, with his wife. She didn't make eye contact. Then Emily, the middle child, came with her boyfriend, whose name I could never remember. Laughter bounced between them like a ball I hadn't been invited to catch. No one asked how I was. No one even asked if I wanted to sit. I drifted to my seat. End of the table, cornered between the wall and a potted plant that brushed my shoulder every time I moved. From here, I could see everyone, but felt part of no one. They talked about work, about travel plans, about mutual friends whose names I didn't recognize. I sipped the wine slowly. It was good. Too good. Expensive. And yet, I had brought my own bottle, still in my bag, unopened, unnecessary. At some point, Marlene brought out the food. Michael carved the roast. Plates were passed, but not to me. I had to reach. Small things, you might think. But after years of them, they pressed down like stone. And then it happened. Michael leaned in, maybe to refill my glass, maybe just passing behind me to grab something. He paused, bent a little, close to my ear. I thought he might say something kind, something like, "Thanks for coming." Instead, he said it. A whisper, flat and sharp as glass. "You're just waiting to die." I didn't move, didn't breathe. For a second, I wondered if I'd imagined it. But no. The smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, the brief glance sideways to see if anyone heard, confirmed it. He wasn't joking. He wasn't drunk. He meant it. He walked away before I could respond. I sat there, my fork suspended above my plate, the warmth in the room turning cold. The sounds around me faded. Laughter, clinks of silverware, someone talking about an art gallery. All of it, suddenly very far away. I reached into my bag. My fingers brushed the envelope. Thick paper, legally sealed. My new will. I stood up, and the room went silent. All heads turned, some still mid-bite, forks frozen inches from their mouths, others mid-sentence, words dying on their tongues. I wasn't loud. I hadn't cleared my throat or tapped a glass. I had simply stood. That was all it took. That alone told me everything I needed to know. "Mom?" Marlene's voice cut first, brittle and overly sweet. "Is everything all right?" Michael didn't speak. He looked at me, jaw tight, eyes unreadable, like he wasn't sure if I was about to faint or flip the table. That's the problem with people who think you're weak. When you finally stand, they don't know what to do with you. I held the envelope in one hand. The weight of it wasn't much, but what it meant, that was a different story. I hadn't planned this, not like this. I had intended to hand it to my lawyer quietly next week, to file it and be done. But sometimes life forces your hand. "No," I said simply, my voice steady. "No, Marlene. Everything is not all right." A silence fell like a thick curtain. Even the youngest, Michael's stepson, what was his name, stopped chewing. He had never spoken a word to me directly. I looked around the table. The people I had raised, held as babies, nursed through sickness, bailed out of crises. They stared at me now like I was a ghost who'd walked through the wrong door. "I wasn't going to do this tonight," I began, fingers tightening around the edge of the envelope. But since someone feels comfortable whispering death into my ear at the dinner table, I think now is the time. Michael flinched, just slightly, and looked down. Marlene glanced at him sharply. The others sat stunned, probably unsure what this was about or how serious I was. "This," I said, holding up the envelope, "is my new will, signed, witnessed, and sealed last Wednesday at 10:32 a.m. by Mr. Franklin Tate, my attorney of over 20 years. "Mom, come on," Michael muttered, his voice low, cautionary. "Let's," I cut in. My tone surprised even me. Calm, clear. The same tone I used when Michael was 12 and tried to lie about breaking the neighbor's window. "Because for years," I continued, "I've let things slide. I've swallowed disrespect. I've told myself it was a phase, that people were busy, that families grow apart. But what I won't do, what I won't ever accept again, is being treated like I'm already gone." Marlene opened her mouth, closed it. I could see her trying to assess the risk. She was always good at gauging social terrain. "I'm 79 years old," I said. Not senile, not invisible, not dead, not waiting to die. I slipped the will out of the envelope. Heavy cream paper, blue ink, sharp signature. I didn't need to read the entire thing, just the important parts, just the parts they needed to hear. I hereby leave my house at 42 Sycamore Street, valued at $380,000, I read aloud. To my granddaughter Nora Elwood, in full ownership, effective immediately upon my death. She will not be required to share or sell. A small gasp. Emily, Michael's daughter from his first marriage, looked up sharply. She hadn't spoken to me since Christmas, when I gave her a check and she didn't even say thank you. To Nora, I repeated, looking around. Because she visits, because she calls, because she doesn't look past me like I'm furniture. Michael was shaking his head now, as if trying to stop something already set in motion. This isn't the time, Mom. We can talk later. No, I said again. We can't. Later never comes. I turned a page. My savings, currently totaling $146,000 across 3 accounts, will be placed into a protected trust managed by my lawyer to fund education, health care, and housing assistance for young women estranged from their families. Marlene's jaw tensed. Her dreams of kitchen renovations and new landscaping had just evaporated. My jewelry, my pension benefits, and all remaining assets will be managed by a third party and distributed according to instructions not disclosed here. But know this? I looked directly at Michael now. None of it is coming to you. He opened his mouth, closed it. You may think I'm being dramatic, I added. But you made a choice long before I ever did. You chose to see me as a burden, a relic, an obligation. You used my love like it was owed to you. I folded the will, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it into my bag. The room remained silent. I've paid your mortgage, Michael. I covered Emily's braces, Jacob's second car, even your golf retreat last spring, though you told me it was a conference. I never asked for thanks, but I didn't expect cruelty either. I reached for my coat. Dinner smells lovely, I said softly, but I've lost my appetite. I walked to the door without hurry. No one followed. No one called out. Only one voice broke the silence. Nora's, small, uncertain. Grandma? I paused, hand on the knob. Yes, sweetheart? Can I come with you? For a second, I didn't move. Her voice hung in the air like a fragile thread between us, one that could snap with the wrong word, the wrong breath. I turned slowly. Nora stood halfway up from her chair, uncertain. She was wearing that pale green cardigan I'd given her last Christmas, the only one who ever wore my gifts more than once. Her hair was pinned back messily, and her eyes, those steady, thoughtful eyes, were locked on mine. Marlene spoke before I could. Nora, sit down, she said sharply. This isn't your concern. Nora looked at her, then at Michael. It is, she said quietly. It's my grandmother. Michael's voice cut in, lower, measured. You don't need to get involved. This is complicated. It's not, I said, stepping back into the room. It's simple. I looked at Nora. You can come if you want, but only if it's your choice. Nora didn't hesitate. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair, ignored Marlene's glare, and crossed the room toward me. As she passed her father, he reached out and touched her elbow. Nora. She paused, but didn't look at him. I hope you realize what you're doing, he said, quieter now. She glanced over her shoulder. I do. Do you? We walked out together, her hand gently slipping into mine as the door closed behind us. The chill outside bit through my sweater, but I barely felt it. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. My car was parked 2 houses down. Nora didn't speak until we got in. I turned the heater on full and sat with my hands on the steering wheel, waiting for the trembling in my chest to settle. "Grandma," she said finally, voice soft. "I didn't know it had gotten that bad." "It didn't get that bad, sweetheart," I said. "It was always that bad. I just stopped pretending." She stared ahead, chewing at her thumbnail, a nervous habit she'd had since she was little. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Because I thought love would be enough to fix it," I said. "I thought that if I just kept giving, eventually they'd remember how to give back." We sat in silence for a while. Across the street, lights flickered on in a warm-looking house, and I wondered if that family laughed together, or if someone in there sat alone at dinner too. "Where are we going?" Nora asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "I didn't plan this. I just knew I couldn't sit at that table anymore." Nora nodded. "Let's go get pie." I looked at her, puzzled. She smiled, just a little. "There's that diner near your old neighborhood, remember? The one with the tiny booths and the weird jukebox? You always said they had the best pie in the state." I stared at her for a moment, heart swelling. "They do?" We drove in easy silence, the kind that only exists between people who really know each other. The diner was still there. Same chipped sign, same humming neon light. We took a booth near the back, and Nora ordered for us without asking. She remembered. Apple pie for me, cherry for her, extra whipped cream. The waitress, a girl who couldn't have been older than 20, brought our plates and said, "Anything else?" "Yes," I said, surprising myself. "Could I borrow a pen and some paper?" She blinked. "Sure, I think I've got something." Nora watched me curiously as the girl returned with a notepad and a hotel pen. I began to write. Not the full will. That was sealed and legal. But something else. Something important. "What are you writing?" Nora asked. "My own eulogy," I said. Her brow furrowed. "Grandma—" "Not for a funeral," I cut in, smiling gently. "For me. While I'm still alive." Because that's what people like Michael and Marlene never understood. They thought respect came after death, as if obituaries were redemption, as if flowers at a grave erased years of silence. But I didn't want to be honored when I couldn't hear it. I wanted to be seen now. I wrote for 15 minutes, pausing only to sip coffee. Nora didn't interrupt. She just let me write. When I finished, I folded the paper in half and handed it to her. "Read it later," I said. "And when the time comes, you can use it. Or not." "That's up to you." She took it carefully, like something sacred, and tucked it into her coat. "I don't want to wait until then to say things," she said. "I'm proud of you." I laughed, not a chuckle, a real laugh. "For what?" "For standing up, for choosing yourself, for not letting them get away with pretending you don't matter." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You'll inherit more than a house, Nora. You'll inherit this spine, too." "I hope so." Outside, the sky had darkened fully. A few stars were visible through the diner's fogged-up window. I looked at my reflection, faintly caught in the glass. The lines, the gray, the tired eyes, but also the strength. The fire still left. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting to die. I felt like I had just begun to live. The next morning, the house was silent. That particular kind of silence that settles after something permanent has shifted. I boiled water for tea the way I always did. kettle whistling, 2 slices of toast left untouched. But everything felt different. My phone buzzed twice before I even finished my first sip. Michael. The first message was one word. Really? The second. Call me. I didn't reply. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the empty chair across from me, the one James used to sit in. He would have said something clever, something calm but sharp, like he always did when people mistook my kindness for passivity. They never expect the tree to fight back, he once told me. They only expect it to give shade and fruit. But sometimes, Margaret, the roots are deeper than they know. Michael called next. I watched the phone buzz for a full minute. He didn't leave a voicemail. Instead, I picked up my notepad and wrote out a list. Things I will no longer apologize for aging, for saying no, for keeping what I've earned, for remembering what people say when they think I'm too old to matter, for reading the will aloud. I tore the page out and pinned it to the refrigerator with the cat-shaped magnet Nora had made when she was 10. By noon, Marlene had texted, "We need to talk. You've embarrassed Michael." No hello. No how are you. No mention of what Michael had said to me. And that was all I needed to know. Embarrassment, not regret. Damage control, not apology. I turned the phone off and left it in the drawer. I didn't need it. Not today. Instead, I drove. I took the long way out of the neighborhood, past the library where I used to take the kids, past the old bakery that was now a bank. I let myself breathe. Eventually, I found myself at the attorney's office. "Mrs. Elwood," the receptionist greeted warmly. "Back so soon?" "I'd like to add something," I said, "to the trust." She guided me to Mr. Tate's office, and within the hour, a new clause was added, a scholarship fund in Nora's name, for young women who'd been overlooked, underestimated, or pushed aside. I left the office feeling lighter. The silence in the car wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. The first letter arrived on Tuesday, handwritten, postmarked locally, but with no return address. I recognized Michael's handwriting immediately. Tight, neat, like he was always afraid of crossing a line, even on paper. It was folded carefully, 2 pages, no greeting, just words. "You've made your point, loud and clear." I was angry, stressed. The comment at dinner was a mistake. "You know I didn't mean it like that. You've always been dramatic, Mom. But this was cruel." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside my old watch and a worn recipe card in James's handwriting. I didn't cry. I didn't respond. Because here's the truth about apologies that come only after consequences. They're not apologies. They're reactions. And I'd lived long enough to know the difference. Later that day, Nora stopped by unannounced. She let herself in with the spare key I'd given her years ago. Something I'd forgotten until I heard the front door open and her voice call softly. "Grandma?" I was in the garden, cutting back the roses, the way James used to do every spring. "Out here," I called. She came around the side, her shoes crunching on gravel. She knelt beside me without hesitation, picking up the fallen branches. She had always been like this. Hands in the dirt, eyes on the real things. "I think I broke the family," she said after a while. I looked at her, surprised. "They're furious," she continued. "Dad won't stop pacing. Marlene says you've ruined their reputation. Emily told me I was selfish. Jacob called me a traitor." "They're wrong," I said. "I know," she whispered, "but it still hurts." I reached for her hand. "You didn't break the family, Nora. You just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken." She looked at me then, really looked. "I don't want to lose them," You won't, I said gently. But you also can't lose yourself trying to keep them. We sat in the quiet for a while, the sun beginning to dip behind the neighbor's garage, the smell of fresh soil in the air. I added a scholarship fund, I told her. In your name. Her head jerked. What? For young women who feel like they don't belong, who've been silenced or dismissed. You'll help select the recipients when the time comes. Grandma. I'm not giving you money, Nora, I said. I'm giving you responsibility. Because you've proven you can be trusted with something that matters. She looked down, overwhelmed. I could tell. But I also saw the steel in her spine. The same steel I felt returned to mine. That night, I received another message. This time from Emily. You've divided us. Dad is devastated. You're ruining everything over a single comment. Nora is too young to understand what you've done. I didn't reply, but I sat with it. What they didn't understand, what they couldn't, is that I didn't ruin the family. I simply refused to carry it alone anymore. The next morning, I opened the front door and found a bouquet on the porch. White lilies and blue hydrangeas, expensive, tasteful, arranged by someone who'd asked for something respectful. No note. But I didn't need one. I carried them to the kitchen and set them on the counter. The stems were still damp, freshly trimmed. A delivery, not a personal gesture. A message, but not a conversation. I didn't put them in water. Instead, I slid them into the trash. I spent the rest of the morning cleaning. Not because anything needed cleaning, but because there's a certain kind of grief, not for someone lost, but for the illusions we finally let die, that can only be scrubbed out of a floorboard or shaken from old curtains. I boxed up photo albums, not to throw them away, but to move them out of the living room. I didn't want Michael's face looking at me from every wall. Not now. By noon, I was tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from age, but from years of pretending. I made lunch, a simple sandwich, tea, a pear from the garden. I sat at the table, looked across at James's chair, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't imagine him filling the silence. It was just me, and that was all right. Then the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Nora would have called. My neighbor, June, always knocked. I opened it slowly. Michael stood on the porch. No flowers, no gifts, no apology in his eyes. Just a man who looked like a boy again. Unsure, unsteady, annoyed that the world hadn't bent his way this time. Can I come in? No. He blinked. It's still your house. Yes. Mine. I stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind me. Say what you came to say. He looked around like the quiet neighborhood could save him. You're blowing everything out of proportion. It was one sentence, one bad moment. It was the most honest thing you've said to me in years. His jaw tightened. You always do this. Turn yourself into the victim. Every time something doesn't go your way. You mean like not being spoken to? Not being invited into conversations in my own family? Not being told about weddings until after the photos are posted? He opened his mouth, closed it. I didn't give him time to regroup. You think I read the will to punish you? I asked. I read it because it was the first time in 30 years anyone at that table had to stop and listen to me. He looked at the ground. You've always been dramatic. No, I said. I've always been quiet. There's a difference. He shifted, uncomfortable. Marlene's furious. She says you humiliated us. I didn't humiliate anyone, I said calmly. You did. When you forgot I wasn't just a seat filler at your table. When you decided I was someone to tolerate, not someone to cherish. Michael stared at me for a long time. I saw it then. Not guilt, not sorrow, but calculation. Measuring how much he had to say to make this go away. I came to ask you to reconsider. I raised an eyebrow. The will, he clarified. I know what you meant. He spread his hands. We're your family. No, I said quietly. You're my blood. That's not the same thing. He didn't respond. Couldn't. I turned and opened the door behind me. Goodbye, Michael. His voice stopped me. You think Nora's going to stay loyal forever? He said. She's young. People change. I looked over my shoulder. Maybe, I said. But at least she sees me. And if that's all I get, being truly seen by one person before I die, it's more than you ever gave me. I closed the door gently. No slam, no drama. Just finality. I didn't cry. After the door clicked shut, I stood there for a long moment, hand still on the knob, waiting to feel something. A tremble, a sting, maybe even regret. But all I felt was stillness, a strange, rare peace. Michael's footsteps faded down the porch. I didn't watch him go. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, made tea, and sat by the window with the silence I used to fear. The silence I now welcomed like a guest who finally understood not to speak over me. By evening, Nora called. I heard he showed up. I smiled. Your father's never been subtle. Did he say anything worth repeating? I sipped my tea. He said everything I expected him to say, in exactly the tone I expected, and I gave him exactly what he came for. Nora paused. Which was? Closure. Just not the kind he was hoping for. There was a silence on the line. Then, you're stronger than anyone gives you credit for. No, I said. I'm just tired of being underestimated. The next day, I went into town. Not for errands, not to run away from the quiet, but because I wanted to go somewhere I hadn't been in years, the public library. It was where I used to take Michael when he was a boy, back when he still held my hand in public and thought the smell of old books was magic. The building hadn't changed much. New signs, some fresh paint, but the same oak tables, the same dusty corners. I walked past the history shelves, through the biographies, and stopped in front of the community board. On it were flyers, dance classes, language groups, grief circles, art workshops. One caught my eye. Memoir Writing for Women 60 Plus. A small group. Free. Tuesdays at 10 a.m. I stood there for a long time staring at that piece of paper. Because here's the thing. For 79 years, I'd lived through wars, recessions, births, deaths, betrayals, forgivenesses, and love that didn't survive its own weight. But I'd never written any of it down. Maybe I was afraid no one would want to read it. Maybe I was more afraid they would. I pulled the flyer down and folded it into my purse. Then I walked to the front desk and asked for a library card. The young woman behind the counter smiled. First time? In a while, I said. But I think it's time to borrow some stories again. When I got home, the house felt different, not emptier, just wider somehow. Like the walls had finally stopped listening for someone else's approval. I took out a notebook, the one James had given me on our 40th anniversary. Blank, leather-bound, with a note inside that read, "One day, you'll write something the world needs." That day had come, and the first line came easily. I used to believe being needed was the same as being loved. The next Tuesday, I walked into the community room on the library's second floor, with nothing but my notebook and a pair of reading glasses I hadn't worn since James passed. The chairs were arranged in a circle, not like a classroom, but like a quiet agreement that every woman here had something worth saying. There were 7 of us, older women, some in pressed blouses, some in sweaters older than the building, all carrying stories that didn't ask permission to exist. The facilitator, a kind woman named Dolores, with silver curls and a voice like rain on a tin roof, welcomed each of us gently. "No need to impress anyone here," she said. "We write for ourselves, and we write because we've survived too much to stay silent." I almost cried right there. We each introduced ourselves. No last names, no backstories, unless we chose to share. One woman, Ruth, had been a nurse for 40 years. Another, Patricia, had raised 7 children and buried 2. Agnes used to be a jazz singer. They all looked so ordinary, so invisible, and yet the room trembled with what they carried. When it was my turn, I said simply, "I'm Margaret. I've been quiet for most of my life. I'm not anymore." They nodded. No one asked why. We wrote for 10 minutes. Dolores gave us a prompt. "Write about the first time you knew your value." I stared at the blank page, and then I wrote. I was 79. I was seated at the end of a table in a house I helped pay for. My son leaned down and told me I was just waiting to die, and I stood up. Not because I was angry, but because I finally understood that love without respect is just a performance. I read my will aloud, and for the first time in decades, the room listened. When we finished, we didn't read aloud unless we wanted to. I didn't. But I looked around the room at these women. Strangers, yes, but not foreign. I saw in their hands the same map I'd been tracing. Giving, giving, giving until their own names faded. And now, reclaiming them. Letter by letter. After the session, Patricia walked with me down the stairs. "I don't know what you wrote," she said, "but something about your face tells me you've done something brave." I smiled. "I've finally stopped being polite about pain." She laughed. "Took me until 72. We're slow learners, us women. But we get there," I said. And that night, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I pulled out the old record player from the closet, dusted it off, found James's favorite, Ella Fitzgerald, and let the music fill the house. I danced alone in the living room, barefoot, laughing softly at myself. I probably looked ridiculous. But no one was watching. No one was judging. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't surviving my life. I was inhabiting it. 2 days later, a letter arrived addressed not to me, but to Ms. Margaret Elwood, trustee. It was from the firm handling the scholarship fund. Inside, they'd enclosed early interest forms. Emails from young women across the state who had heard, somehow, that something was being set up for girls who had nowhere soft to fall. One of them wrote, "I don't know who you are, but if you're the reason this exists, thank you. My own mother hasn't spoken to me since I told her I didn't want to marry the man she picked. I've been living in my car. I just want to finish school. I just want a chance." Another wrote, "I saw the post online. I've never applied for anything like this. But your description, that it's for women who feel forgotten, made me feel like I wasn't crazy for wanting more." I read them all. And when I finished, I sat back in my chair, holding those pieces of paper like they were heavier than gold. Because they were. They were proof. Proof that my voice, the one I'd kept small for so long, was finally doing what it was always meant to do. Not to please, but to protect, to lift, to change something. The doorbell rang while I was still holding the letters. I tucked them under the cushion of my chair before opening the door. It was Emily, my granddaughter. Not Nora, not the kind-eyed girl who visited and remembered birthdays. But Emily, who had once wrapped her arms around me as a child and now looked at me like I'd become the problem no one wanted to deal with. She was dressed perfectly, of course. Crisp blouse, tailored pants, makeup done just so. But her expression was tight. "Can I come in?" she asked, though it wasn't a question. I stepped aside, wordless. She walked in like someone used to claiming space, her heels echoing too loudly on the old wood floors. She didn't sit. Just stood in the center of the room, staring at the bookshelf like she might find something she could use. "I thought it was time we talked," she said finally. I nodded. "All right." She turned to face me. "You've created a mess." I blinked. "A mess?" I repeated. Her arms crossed. "You've set the entire family against each other. Dad's not talking to Nora. Aunt Julia's furious. Jacob's wife said she doesn't want their kids around any of us until things are stable again." "I see," I said calmly. "You don't seem upset." "I'm not." Her eyes narrowed. "Why not?" I stood, walked over to the mantel, adjusted a crooked frame, a picture of James and I from our 25th anniversary. We were laughing. I don't remember at what, just that it had been real. "Because," I said, still facing the photo, "it was never stable to begin with." Emily made a noise. Frustration, maybe. "You've torn the family apart over a feeling." I turned slowly. "No," I said. "I tore off the mask. That's different." She didn't respond. I gestured to the couch. "Sit, if you want." She did, stiffly. Her knees crossed, her shoulders pulled in like she was bracing for a lecture. But I had none to give. "I didn't come to fight," she said. "I just want to understand why. Why the will, the money, the spectacle at dinner? Why now?" I sat across from her. Let the quiet stretch long enough for the question to settle. "You want honesty?" "Yes. Because I was dying." She blinked hard. "What?" "I was dying, not in body, though that'll come sure enough. But I was dying in the ways that matter. My voice, my place, my purpose. Being erased one polite dinner at a time." Emily's face softened. Just a little. "I spent decades giving," I continued. "Gifts, time, silence, support. And what did I get in return? Sidelined, ignored, talked over. And finally, whispered to like a shadow at the table." She looked down. "I'm not angry anymore," I added. "I'm just done." Emily swallowed. "So, this is about punishing everyone?" "No," I said. "This is about protecting the one thing I have left. My dignity." We sat in silence again. Then in a quieter voice, she asked, Is there any way to fix it?" I studied her face. It was the first time she'd looked like a granddaughter in years. Not a socialite, not a strategist, not a critic. I gave her the only answer I had. "That depends on who's willing to tell the truth." Emily left quietly. No raised voices, no door slams, no final declarations. Just a soft, unsure thank you as she stepped off the porch. And I couldn't tell if it meant for the conversation or for the silence I'd offered when she needed it. Either way, I let her go. The next morning, I opened the front door to find a small box on the porch. No note, no name. Inside, a folded scarf I'd knitted for Michael years ago. Still perfectly intact, still carrying the scent of cedar from his old closet. A return, not a gift. I didn't bring it inside. I left it on the porch railing, and the wind took it by evening. That same day, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Ms. Margaret Elwood?" the woman asked, voice polite but firm. "It is. I'm calling from the Wilmot Herald. We heard about the scholarship fund you recently established. Would you be open to an interview?" I hesitated. I wasn't interested in attention, but maybe the story wasn't mine alone anymore. "Yes," I said, "but only if you promise one thing." "What's that?" "Don't turn it into a tale about charity. This isn't about generosity. It's about reclaiming something that was taken from women like me over and over." There was a pause. Then, "I think I understand." The interview happened 2 days later. A short profile piece, nothing flashy. They titled it, "She Wasn't Waiting to Die." I didn't care about the article itself, but Nora framed the clipping and gave it to me in secret, like a child slipping a drawing into a parent's coat pocket. "You're not a ghost anymore," she said. I hung the frame near the back door. Not front and center. Just somewhere I'd see it in the quiet moments when I needed to remember what I'd done. One morning, a few weeks later, I opened the mailbox and found another letter. This one in James's handwriting. My heart jolted, and then I remembered. Years ago, he'd written me letters for someday. I'd tucked them away in a small box in the attic. This must have been misplaced. Somehow returned to me through time. The envelope was brittle. The ink had faded a little. But the words, his words, were still clear. "If you're reading this, it means you're still standing. And if you're still standing, then no one ever managed to crush you completely. You were never weak, Maggie. You were just tired of being expected to hold everything and never drop it. If the day comes when you put it all down, finally, truly, I hope you know, you've earned that 100 times over." I closed my eyes and pressed the paper to my chest, not for grief, but for confirmation. That I hadn't imagined my worth. That I hadn't become bitter, only braver. I didn't expect to hear from Marlene. Of all the people I'd distanced myself from, she was the one I imagined would hold on to silence the longest. Not out of pride, but out of strategy. Marlene was always a woman who measured her words like currency. She never said sorry unless it bought her something. So when I saw her name flash on my phone, not calling but sending a message, I felt nothing at all. Until I read it. I'd like to speak. Not about money. Not about the will. Just about the way things became what they are. If you're willing. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I was moved, but because I was curious. What version of the story would she tell now that there was no inheritance left to fight for? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked to the edge of the garden, where the soil was softest. The spot where James once planted wild mint, knowing I hated the smell, but loved the memory of it on his skin. I sat on the bench and let the breeze wrap around me. I didn't owe Marlene anything. Not time, not grace, not understanding. But perhaps it wasn't about owing. Perhaps it was about closure. Mine, not hers. So I wrote back, "You can come, but if you lie to me, I'll walk away, and I won't stop walking." She arrived the next morning, not dressed to impress. No makeup, just jeans, a windbreaker, and a nervousness I hadn't seen on her face since she was 24 and trying to impress my son. I met her on the porch. She didn't try to hug me. Thank God for that. Some truths don't belong inside embraces. We sat on the porch steps, side by side, watching the street in silence. I read the article, she said finally. I figured. She looked down at her hands. It was fair. Painful, but fair. I didn't respond. She waited. And then, I never hated you, Margaret. I never said you did. She glanced at me, then looked away again. I just didn't know what to do with you. That, I thought, was probably the closest thing to a truth I'd get. You were kind, she continued, but firm, and it scared me. Because my own mother, she was never soft, but she was small. You weren't. You had opinions, boundaries, and I was young and insecure. And you didn't make room for that. I let her speak. Because this wasn't about agreeing. It was about watching her come to terms with her own part. And Michael, she said more quietly, he started resenting you for reasons I didn't question. I just absorbed them. And I stopped seeing you. Like really seeing you. You helped him build the wall, I said calmly. She nodded. Yes. I turned toward her slightly. And now that the inheritance is gone, the wall has no use. She looked at me sharply, but not with anger. I won't insult you by pretending that didn't factor into the timing. But this isn't about the money. Not now. It's about Nora. About what she said to me after she walked out. What did she say? She said, you and Dad always acted like she'd be here forever. Like you could come back later and fix things. But people aren't museums. They don't preserve themselves while you're gone. A long silence followed. I let her sit with that. Then she turned to me fully. I won't ask you to forgive me, but I want to say it anyway. I was wrong. Not a tear in her voice. Not a performance. Just the sentence. Quiet. Complete. I nodded. That's enough, I said. And I meant it. She didn't stay for coffee. Didn't ask to come inside. She stood, brushed off her jeans, and looked at me with something like humility. Whatever happens with the family, she said, thank you for showing Nora how to choose herself. I looked out at the garden. She didn't need me to show her. She just needed permission. A week later, I found myself standing in a room I hadn't visited in over a decade, the attic. It was the only space in the house that still held dust like a secret. James used to call it the museum, not because it was filled with anything precious, but because everything up there had stopped belonging to real time. Old coats, a broken lamp, boxes of letters I never sent. I went up there with one purpose, to find the photo. There was an old picture of me, long before I became Mom or Grandma. It had been taken by James on a Sunday morning, years before Michael was born. I was sitting on the front step of our first apartment, wearing jeans and no makeup, reading a book with my knees tucked up. That version of me, free, sharp, unknowingly beautiful, had been buried under years of usefulness. I dug through 3 boxes before I found it, tucked inside a birthday card I'd written to myself one year and never mailed. I held the photo in my lap like it was a mirror. Because here's the truth. I hadn't just been angry at my family. I'd been angry at myself for disappearing so willingly, for folding myself smaller every year and calling it love, for staying silent, for letting the woman in that photograph become a shadow in service of everyone else's light. I framed the photo and hung it in my bedroom, not beside James, not among the family portraits, just alone, as she deserved to be. A reminder of the girl I was before I became everyone else's safety net. That evening, Nora came by. She brought with her a stack of folders, applications for the scholarship. I thought you'd want to read through them, she said, spreading them across the kitchen table. We read in silence for nearly an hour. One girl wanted to become a lawyer for domestic abuse survivors. Another had been disowned at 16 and was working nights at a grocery store to finish high school. A third was 19, working as a live-in nanny for a family that treated her like staff, not like a human being. Each application came with a letter. Each letter felt like someone whispering their hope into my hands. When we finished, Nora looked up at me, her eyes glassy. How are we supposed to choose? We don't choose, I said. We start small. Then we grow. She reached across the table and took my hand. You're changing lives. I shook my head. I'm restoring something. For them, for me. This was never about saving anyone. It's about giving back what the world tried to take. She nodded slowly. What did it take from you? I thought for a moment. Time, I said. Years, voice, value, but not all of it. Not the core. Nora leaned back. You're still the core. We sat in that for a moment, the kind of silence that doesn't weigh anything down, but holds you up. Before she left, she paused at the door. I want to write about this someday, she said. Not the drama, not the will, but the choice you made. The moment you stood up and reminded everyone you were still alive. You should, I said. I want women my age to read it and know we don't have to wait until 79. I smiled. And I want women my age to know it's not too late, even if they do. She stepped out into the night, and I stood there for a moment longer, thinking about how many women like us never get that moment, never get to draw the line or rewrite their ending. But I had. And more importantly, I wasn't done yet. It was a Thursday when the lawyer called. Mr. Tate had never been a man of small talk. Even when James passed, he delivered the news like a weather report, steady, precise, not unkind, but careful not to let emotion blur the facts. This time was no different. Mrs. Elwood, he said, I just wanted to inform you that the updated documents have been finalized, notarized, and filed with the county. Everything is in effect. The trust, the scholarship, the property transfer. It's all official. I let out a quiet breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Thank you, Franklin. There's one more thing, he added. Michael's counsel has contacted us. I said nothing. They inquired about contesting the will. Nothing formal has been filed, but I wanted you to be aware. And they have no legal grounds. We've documented everything. Your mental capacity was confirmed by 2 professionals, and your prior financial gifts are categorized as non-reclaimable. In plain terms, they can't touch a cent. I nodded. Let them try then. He paused. You're calmer than I expected. Because I've already lost what mattered, I said. The rest is just noise. After we hung up, I sat in my reading chair, the afternoon sun sliding across the floor in lazy streaks. I thought about all the things I'd done for my children over the years. The night I stayed up sewing a costume for Michael's school play because he forgot to tell me until the day before. The college tuition checks, the emergency wiring of money during job losses, the gentle babysitting offers that were really pleas in disguise. And not once had I asked for repayment. I only ever wanted memory, connection, kindness. But when kindness becomes transactional, it stops being kindness. It becomes control. And control was the one thing I was no longer giving. I spent the rest of the day writing letters. Real ones, on paper, in my own handwriting. One for Nora, one for Patricia from the memoir group, one for the first scholarship recipient. even though she hadn't been chosen yet. Each letter carried the same core message. I see you, I believe you, and you don't need to earn the right to exist. By sunset, the house smelled like rosemary and lemon, a chicken roasting gently in the oven, just for me. I wasn't expecting company. I wasn't celebrating. I was simply treating myself the way I used to treat others, with care. Halfway through dinner, the doorbell rang. I froze, unsure if I wanted to answer it, but something told me I should. It was Jacob, my grandson. He hadn't spoken to me since the dinner, hadn't called, hadn't written. I assumed he'd chosen silence, like so many of the others. He stood on the porch, shoulders slumped, holding a six-pack of soda and looking nothing like the confident young man I remembered. Hi, Grandma. Hello, Jacob. I was in the neighborhood, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Thought maybe I could sit with you for a bit. I opened the door wider. Dinner's still warm. He stepped inside, slower than he used to, more careful. As he sat at the table, I realized something. He didn't come for money, or answers, or apologies. He came for me. He didn't ask about the will. He asked about the garden. We talked until the roast cooled. And when he left, he hugged me the way he did when he was 10. Both arms, no hesitation. Not a grandson asking for something. Just a boy remembering the woman who always fed him first. I received the email from the library late that night. The subject line read, Tuesday Group, Final Session Reminder. I had nearly forgotten it was the end of the program. 6 weeks. That's all it had been. But time inside that room, with those women, those words, felt different, like stepping out of regular air and breathing something cleaner. I stared at the message for a long time. Not because I didn't plan to go, I did, but because the idea of it ending tugged at something soft in me, like finishing a book you didn't know had changed you until the last page closed. That night, I slept without dreams, just the steady rhythm of rain on the roof and the sound of my own breathing. Present, alive. The final session was quiet. Everyone wrote. Some read aloud. Patricia told a story about leaving her husband after 42 years and not regretting it for a single second. Agnes read a poem that made Dolores cry. I didn't read. But I handed in something. 5 pages, folded neatly, with my name signed at the bottom in ink that had run slightly from the rain. Dolores didn't open it. She just held it with both hands and said, Thank you for trusting us with this. On the way home, I took a different route. Past the old church, the baseball field where Michael had played, the corner store where James used to buy lemon candies. So many things that stayed, and so many things that hadn't. When I turned onto my street, I saw Nora's car in the driveway. She was on the porch, holding something behind her back. I raised an eyebrow as I climbed the steps. Planning a surprise? She grinned. Close your eyes. I did. She placed something light into my hands. Okay, open. It was a book, not a thick one, maybe 100 pages. Bound simply, cream cover, black title. Things I Remembered Just in Time, by Margaret Elwood. My throat closed. You printed it, I whispered. She nodded. Not published, not yet. But I thought, maybe you'd want to hold it, to see it as real. I ran my hand over the cover. Where did you left those pages on the kitchen table, after one of the sessions. I made copies, formatted them. I asked Dolores if she'd help. She cried when she saw it. I opened to the first page. My words staring back at me. I am not a relic. I am not a lesson. I am a life still in motion. I looked at Nora. She smiled. You said women like you disappear every day. I thought maybe this could help one of them stay. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tighter than I had in years. Not because I was proud, but because I saw the future in her. And it looked like nothing I'd been allowed to believe was possible. Later that evening, we sat on the porch with tea, watching the last light slip behind the trees. She read sections aloud, laughing sometimes, pausing other times when the words hit too close. And I realized something. This porch, this quiet, this girl beside me reading my own truth back to me. This was the inheritance I'd meant to leave. Not property, not jewelry, but presence. A name that would not be spoken with pity or dismissed with time. A name that would mean something again. I didn't host a party. No celebration, no cake, no look at what I've done moment. That's not how women like me mark victories. We mark them in smaller things, like the first morning we wake up and don't brace for disappointment, or when we open the blinds not for light, but because we're finally ready to be seen, or when we walk into our own kitchen, pour a cup of tea, and think, this is mine, all of it, and no one gets to take it from me again. I got up that morning, the day the article ran again, this time syndicated statewide, and made breakfast for one. Not out of loneliness, out of comfort. I liked my company. After breakfast, I stepped out to water the garden. The mint James planted had come back, more stubborn than ever. I let it grow. A neighbor I'd never really spoken to called over the fence. Mrs. Elwood? That story in the paper? Was that really you? I nodded. She grinned. About time someone said it out loud. I smiled and waved, then bent down to deadhead a rose. That was all. No parade, no confetti. Just one woman, in her garden, finally blooming at her own pace. By noon, the mail arrived. A thick envelope. The name on the return address, Nora Elwood. I opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a copy of the scholarship's first official report, photos of the recipients, handwritten thank you notes, a short piece Nora had written for her college newsletter, titled, The Women Who Refused to Vanish. I read it 3 times. Then I tucked it behind the photo of myself, the one from the attic, where I was still whole, still unclaimed by anyone's expectations. That night, I sat by the window and watched the sky go dark. I thought about every woman who'd ever been told to wait her turn, every mother who'd poured herself into people who never looked back, every grandmother who sat quietly at the end of a table while others passed her the salt but never the floor. I thought about them all, and I hoped, God, I hoped, that somewhere, some woman would read that story and hear herself in it. That she'd understand it's not too late. That quiet isn't the same as weak. That standing up, even with shaking hands, still counts. Maybe she'd be 60, or 79, or just 20, but already tired. Maybe she'd stand at her own family dinner and say, no more. And if she did, maybe she'd remember me. Not my name, not my face, but the moment I stood. And maybe she'd think, I don't need to be loved the way they expect. I need to be respected the way I deserve. And maybe that would be enough to keep her going. I closed the window, turned off the light, and sat in the dark a while longer. Not waiting, just being. If you know someone who needs to hear this, share it. We don't need applause. We just need to stop apologizing for being alive.